morning, my name is Patty and I'm a docent, and this is an area that is called primary flight control, and anywhere I take you, you can take pictures, and even when I'm talking you can take pictures. Are you hearing me back there with this? Thanks. We have a boss and a mini boss. Both must be naval aviators or naval flight officers, and they must have had command of a tailhook squadron, meaning a squadron that is on board a carrier. The boss has an excellent view of the aircraft returning, while the mini boss has an excellent view of the aircraft being launched. During air operations, you have about 250 personnel on the flight deck. Average age back then was 19.5 years old. And during air operations, this air boss is responsible or controls the airspace 2,500 feet above the ship and a 5-mile radius around the ship. Now this is an interesting board. It's called a land launch status board, and during operations it would have the pilot, the aircraft, the squadron, the mission, etc. And during operations it unhooks at the top and it would swing this way, and a very talented enlisted person would be riding backwards. Conserve space, but quite a skill. Currently the names on this board are of Midway crew who are missing in action, killed in action, or otherwise lost their lives. So currently it is a board of memory and honor. Now along this bulkhead there are manuals. Someone can flip up the plastic covers. You can, there you go. They're like automobile manuals but much more technical, and they would be for each of the aircraft that would be on the ship during operations. And during operations you have junior aviators, junior pilots, who would be standing there. They're probably about 24 years old perhaps. They're standing there. They're not talking to one another. They're not skylarking. And skylarking is a Navy term meaning you're looking around for everything else. Very responsible. But in the event of an emergency, either in the recovery or the launching of the aircraft, the boss or the mini boss would look to those junior officers for the quickest, safest, most efficient solution. Because they stand there and basically do nothing until an emergency, they have the nickname of Tower Flowers. So you are all Tower Flowers on the first tour this morning. I'm just going to mention 2 instruments. This one here is called an arresting gear monitor. On the flight deck you have 3 wires and a barrier. The tension of those wires, which are there to connect with the hook to capture the aircraft returning, the tension of those wires must be set for the returning weight of the aircraft, which is going to be less than its launch weight. It is set below decks in different engine rooms, but it is merely monitored here. So this is an arresting gear monitor. This is a Fresnel lens. Located across the flight deck to the right of that white helicopter is a Fresnel lens. It's a visual aid for the pilot to come in on. It's a series of green horizontal lights and vertical lights in the center. It's called a meatball. The meatball is orange. If that meatball is in the center, that aircraft will come in about a 3.5 degree angle above the flight deck, 12 feet, and it will catch the number 2 wire. If that meatball is above the horizon, the aircraft will miss the wire. If the meatball is below the horizon, the aircraft may go into the deck or even possibly into the water. So the meatball is centered. Now that aircraft is coming in, and he comes in at full power, and the reason being is that's in case he, thank you very much, in case he misses that second wire, he has to have the power to come in, comes around, catches the number 2 wire, and in 1, 2, 3 seconds, that aircraft comes to a stop in 340 feet. So think about that when you're on the flight deck. So now we're going to head to the navigation and chart room, and as we go across this walkway we'll be about 85 feet above the pier, and if you look to your left as we're crossing is the big number 41. So when you're on the pier you could see that number and you can see where you were. So please stay together and follow me. of the smallest compartments on this ship. This is the navigation or chart room. It has a navigator. There's only one navigator on the ship, and he also must be a naval aviator or a naval flight officer. He is supported by a wonderful crew of enlisted personnel who are called quartermasters, and they are navigation specialists. I'll briefly tell you about the charts we have. They're not maps, they're nautical charts. And then I'll give you two examples of the oldest form of navigation skills. The charts here, gray is land, white is deep water, dark blue is shallower water, and a lighter blue is deeper water. The chart when we first came in is of Subic Bay in the Philippines, and it was an important port for the Midway because she could be pulled in there to be refueled, resupplied, rest and relaxation for the crew, maybe minor medical issues and minor repairs. The chart here is Yokosuka, Japan, and its importance was that the Midway was the first combat ship to be home ported in a foreign port, and she was there for 18 years, and that allowed for family of the crew to be there also, which was quite a benefit. The chart to my right is a beautiful San Diego harbor, and the Midway was commissioned in 1945. And in 1992, she sailed into this port under her own steam power, and she was decommissioned. And it wasn't until 2004, I've lost the date, that she was brought back down here to be refurbished into this wonderful museum. This year, the Midway will be 75 years old. She is still floating. She's not serviceable in any way, but she goes up and down with the tides. The Midway, when fully loaded, is a 70,000-ton American steel ship. It is important that the Midway crew knows where they are, where they're going, and again, how to get there in the safest, most efficient manner. I'm just going to mention two of the oldest forms. One is called piloting, and piloting would be used in a restricted waterway such as San Diego Harbor. The Midway requires 35 feet of water beneath her keel before she would run aground, which would be severe consequences for a lot of people. So a watchstander goes topside and would take a bearing of known land objects, maybe a church steeple, a lighthouse, a particular cliff, particular natural structure. That information would be passed down here. The watchstander here would put a pencil mark on the chart. Everything is in pencil because they're reusable. You get a second arc, and that's called a fix, and that's how you begin to track. Small numbers on the charts might indicate water depth. Now, the oldest form in the chart when we first came in, there's a black instrument. If you can see, it's called a sextant. There's an example right here, a picture of a sextant, created about 1730, and it requires the watchstander to go topside and take a reading of the angle between the horizon and a celestial being, whether it's a planet, a star, a constellation. And nowadays, who knows what is up there, whether it's satellites belonging to us, or other nations. That information would be passed down here. The same thing occurs. A watchstander would check charts, would put a pencil arc on the chart, a second pencil arc, and you have a fix. Celestial navigation is used in open waterways, and it would be accurate from 1 to 3 miles. Piloting would be used in restricted waterways, and it's accurate up to 100 feet. So those are the earliest forms. This is where the watchstander would stand in piloting. These are modern day aircraft, and please take an opportunity to witness a presentation on launching and recovery of the aircraft. Okay, come on in here. We will be in both these areas. Okay. And ultimately we'll be exiting out that way. You can touch things, you can sit in the chair if you want, but if a buzzer goes off, then I'm in trouble. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to get an adult to steer the ship, okay? So I'll let you know in a minute, so come on.
Wow.
Get everybody in here so I can tell you a little bit about this special area.
Oh my God.
Looking for my last person once again.
We're next to it.
Okay, perfect. So we're in both these areas, so you can mosey around as I'm talking. Last one?
Yes.
One more? Thanks. This is an area, this is called the bridge, and this is the pilot house. When we first came in, that is the captain's chair. The captain is the ultimate authority on this ship. Even if a rear admiral is on board, the captain has the authority for this ship. He also must be a naval aviator or a naval flight officer. He's probably maybe about 50 years old. And during operations, you have 4,500 personnel on board this ship. Tremendous responsibility. So he relies on junior officers, and there would be 3 right up front in the bridge. One is called Officer of the Deck, and it's his responsibility to carry out the plan of the day per the captain's direction. The next person is called Junior Officer of the Deck, and it's his responsibility to provide information to these 2 enlisted personnel regarding the speed and direction of the ship. The third person is called Junior Officer of the Watch, and it's his responsibility to monitor all the surface craft around the ship. In 1980, the Midway was involved with a collision with a Panamanian freighter. During night operations, the freighter actually went under the bow of the Midway. 2 lives on the Midway were lost, but it's a short story about how the heroism of the crew prevented further loss of life. On the hangar deck of the movie theater to the left is a written story about the Cactus collision. So if you have a chance, just read it. This is called a skunk board, surface contact unknown. This is where the junior officer of the watch would be providing information to another enlisted person who stands behind and writes backwards and identifying all the surface craft in the area, just like that young man back there. Okay. Now here we have 2 enlisted personnel, and I'm going to ask you to take this wheel, okay? Let me have him. Now, this is called a helmsman. He is about 19 and a half years old, okay? It is his responsibility to steer this ship. He can't see where he's going. He's relying on the instruments, okay? He's taken verbal direction from the junior officer of the deck. Now, I'm going to use these ladies. This is called a lee helmsman. This is called an engine order telegraph. Another 19-and-a-half-year-old gentleman. Females were not allowed on board combat ships till about 1996, but now you can, okay? So both of these are interchangeable. The lee helmsman provides information to the 4 engine rooms on the Midway, so they can generate enough steam to complete the mission. 4 engine rooms on the Midway. Number 3 is available to visit. I suggest you do that. You're way below the water level, and you can imagine what it'd be like during operations. Now these were, maybe last year, just drove their daddy's car, so they have tremendous responsibility. I joined the Navy at 18, and looking back, I wasn't as responsible as I thought I was back then. So I have tremendous admiration for all our young enlisted personnel, or all military coming in regardless of the service. Now, to keep these young men in line, we have a bosun's mate of the watch, senior petty officer who is responsible for the training of these 2 young men in coordination with the navigator who's moved out to the gator's chair. He's responsible for the discipline. It's no nonsense. He's also responsible for the announcement that you hear as you go about the ship. I'm going to mention 3 things before we leave. On the back wall is the black and white photograph. The Midway is the big ship. The 2 little ones are supply ship. The Midway carried 2.6 million gallons of diesel fuel and 1.4 million gallons of aircraft fuel. She could only refuel in port, or she could refuel at sea, in the middle of the ocean, so she could continue on with her mission. The third way that supplies would be brought on board is through the flight deck. During the evacuation of Saigon in 1975, over 3,000 evacuees were brought on board this Midway, in addition to the crew of 4,500 already. It's a great humanitarian effort. Cots were placed on the hangar deck. Helicopters were pushed over the side because they can never be refueled. So over 3,000 evacuees were brought on board. Another humanitarian mission for the Midway. As we exit, to the left, and you'll be going down the stairs, is the captain's at-sea cabin. During operations, the captain is in his chair or that at-sea cabin. He must be immediately accessible in the event of emergency. The possessions in that cabin now are of the last captain of this beautiful ship.
Bye.